The host wanted to make an example out of Stallone. Instead, he became the perfect example of why people don't trust mainstream media anymore. The studio lights were bright, too bright, the kind that made people sweat even when they weren't nervous. But Sylvester Stallone wasn't nervous. He sat back in the chair, legs apart, shoulders relaxed, waiting. The audience murmured in anticipation, some clutching their phones, already poised to record. They knew something was about to happen. Across from him sat Ethan Caldwell, a polished, sharp-dressed TV host known for his progressive slant and his love of gotcha moments. He leaned forward, a smug grin creeping across his face. He had interviewed politicians, activists, and Hollywood elites, always managing to get them to stumble. But Stallone? That was new territory. "Mr. Stallone," Ethan started, his voice smooth, rehearsed. "You've always been a symbol of American toughness, but do you think that kind of masculinity is outdated? I mean, in today's world, don't you think we should redefine strength to be more inclusive?" A few audience members chuckled, some nodding in agreement. Ethan's fans, the kind who expected him to trap his guests in their own words. Stallone blinked, a slow, deliberate blink. Then he leaned in, elbows on his knees, and exhaled through his nose. "You mean, do I think being tough is a bad thing now?" Ethan smirked. "Well, I think we're past the era where men need to punch their way through problems. Don't you think the world has moved on from that kind of outdated thinking?" Silence, the kind that stretches long enough to make people shift in their seats. Stallone scratched his chin. Then he laughed, not a polite chuckle, a deep, genuine belly laugh. "You're serious?" he finally said. "You think toughness is a problem?" Ethan straightened his tie. "I think it can be toxic when it discourages vulnerability, yes." Stallone nodded slowly, like he was processing. Then he leaned back, stretching his arms across the back of his chair. "Let me ask you something," he said, voice low, deliberate. "If someone broke into your house tonight, do you want a tough guy in there, or do you want someone who's going to sit down and talk about their feelings?" The audience let out a few gasps, a few scattered claps. Ethan opened his mouth, but Stallone wasn't done. "See, toughness ain't about punching walls or yelling the loudest. It's about standing your ground when life knocks you down. It's about protecting your family. It's about discipline, respect, hard work. And if you think the world doesn't need that anymore," he shook his head, "then I don't know what world you're living in, man." Ethan forced a chuckle, but there was a flicker of something behind his eyes. Hesitation. He hadn't expected Stallone to hit back so fast. But he wasn't giving up that easily. "All right," Ethan said, shifting in his seat. "But don't you think Hollywood, and let's be honest, your own movies, have glorified violence as the only solution to problems?" Stallone didn't hesitate. "Hollywood glorifies a lot of things. You ever seen a movie where a guy saves the world by filling out paperwork?" Laughter. This time, real laughter. Even some of Ethan's crew members smirked. But Ethan wasn't done. He still had more tricks up his sleeve. But Stallone, he was just getting warmed up. Ethan straightened his posture, adjusting the stack of cue cards on his lap as if searching for the perfect counterpunch. He was good at this, controlling the tempo, leading his guests down a path where they had no choice but to stumble. But Stallone wasn't playing along. "All right, let's talk about influence," Ethan said, flipping through his notes. "You've built a career playing tough, no-nonsense characters, guys who solve problems with their fists, guns, or just brute force. Do you ever think about the message that sends? I mean, don't you feel a responsibility to promote, let's say, a more progressive kind of hero?" The way he emphasized progressive, just enough to let the audience know exactly where this was going, made Stallone smirk. He sat up, stretching his shoulders like a boxer getting ready for the next round. "First of all," Stallone said, voice steady, "I make movies. Movies ain't real. You know that, right?" He raised an eyebrow. "I mean, last time I checked, I never actually went 15 rounds with Apollo Creed, never took down a whole army with a red bandana and a knife, never ran up those steps in Philly, and single-handedly fixed people's problems." A few people in the crowd laughed, but Ethan stayed firm. "Sure, but movies shape culture. Kids grow up watching Rambo and Rocky. Don't you think we should be giving them heroes who solve problems without violence? Stallone exhaled through his nose. Man, you ever seen Rocky? He shook his head. That whole movie was about getting back up when life knocks you down. It wasn't about beating people up. It was about heart, perseverance. And Rambo? He shrugged. That guy was just trying to be left alone. If people had just let him walk through town and mind his business, none of that would have happened. The audience clapped, a little louder this time. Ethan's jaw clenched. He knew this wasn't going the way he had planned, so he leaned forward, speaking softer, more personal. Okay, fair enough, he said. But let's talk about the real world. Let's talk about America. Right now we're at a point where people are questioning what it means to be a man, what it means to be tough. And some might argue that your version of toughness, the old school, don't show weakness kind, is part of the problem, that it creates more division than unity. What do you say to that? Stallone let the question hang in the air. He tapped his fingers on the armrest, eyes locked on Ethan. You ever meet a firefighter? He asked. Ethan blinked. Excuse me? A firefighter, a cop, a guy in the military. Hell, even a single mom working 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. You ever talk to those people? You think toughness is their problem? Stallone shook his head. No, man. Their toughness is what keeps the world running. The problem ain't toughness. The problem is people thinking strength is something bad. Like it's dangerous. Weakness ain't a virtue, pal. Strength with control? That's what keeps people safe. Somewhere in the back, a man let out a low whistle. The energy in the room had shifted. Ethan was losing his grip. But what about... Stallone raised a hand, cutting him off. Not aggressively, just enough to make it clear he wasn't finished. You want to know the real problem? Stallone leaned forward. It's not toughness. It's people who talk about toughness like it's the enemy while living in a world built and protected by tough people. You sit here, in your nice suit, with your scripted questions, trying to tell me what's outdated? Let me tell you something, man. If the world ever really goes sideways, if things get bad, you're going to be real happy there are still guys like me around. Dead silence. Ethan swallowed. He had another question lined up, another attempt to regain control. But the audience had shifted. They weren't nodding with him anymore. They were waiting for Stallone's next words. And Stallone? He wasn't letting up any time soon. Ethan shifted in his seat. The energy in the room was slipping from his grip, and he knew it. This wasn't going the way it was supposed to. Stallone wasn't fumbling. He wasn't tripping over his words or getting defensive. He was owning the room. And now the audience wasn't just listening. They were rooting for him. Ethan forced a smile, trying to regain control. I hear you. I do, he said, voice measured. But let's be honest. There's a difference between being strong and refusing to change. A lot of people would say that your kind of thinking, this old-school mindset, is what's holding society back. Don't you think it's time to move forward? Stallone exhaled slowly, his gaze steady. He could have come back with another joke, another sharp one-liner, but instead, his tone shifted, calm, almost reflective. You ever seen a building being torn down? He asked. Ethan blinked. What? A demolition. You ever watch one? The host hesitated. I mean, yeah, I suppose. Stallone nodded. Takes what? A few seconds to bring it down? A couple charges, a button press, and boom, it's gone. He clasped his hands together. But you ever see one being built? Ethan didn't answer. That takes years, Stallone continued. Brick by brick, steel by steel. Men working day and night, laying the foundation, making sure it can hold up. Now the people with the detonators, they don't care about that. They don't think about the work, the sweat, the people who risk their lives to build it. They just want to see it come crashing down. The audience was locked in. Nobody moved. You say moving forward, Stallone said, but moving where? Forward ain't always the right direction. Sometimes people get so caught up in change they don't even stop to think about what they're tearing down. They don't ask if what they're breaking might actually be worth keeping. Ethan licked his lips. He could feel the weight of the moment. He had gone into this interview expecting an easy target, a celebrity who would crack under pressure, a man who could be reduced to a caricature. But Stallone was proving him wrong. And worse, the audience knew it. "All right," Ethan said, forcing a chuckle. "That's an interesting perspective, but let's be real. Society has changed. We don't live in the same world we did when you made Rocky. People are more aware now. We're thinking critically about gender roles, systemic issues." "Thinking critically?" Stallone interrupted, raising an eyebrow. "Or just criticizing?" The crowd erupted. Some clapped, some gasped, and even Ethan's own camera crew exchanged looks. This wasn't just an interview anymore. This was a battle. Ethan held up his hands, trying to regain his composure. Okay, he said over the noise. "So let me ask you this. If strength, if toughness is so important, why do you think so many people push back against it? Why do so many people feel like it's outdated?" Stallone let the question hang in the air for a beat before leaning in, voice lower now, almost conspiratorial. "Because weak people don't like being reminded they're weak." The crowd exploded. Some stood up, clapping. Others just sat there, stunned. Ethan opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Stallone let the reaction ride out before sitting back. "Look," he said, "I ain't saying everybody needs to be some action hero. I'm saying life's gonna throw punches whether you like it or not. And when it does, the world ain't gonna care about your feelings. It's gonna ask you one question. Can you take the hit and keep moving forward?" Ethan had nothing. No quip, no comeback, just silence. But outside of that studio, something even bigger was happening. Because the second that moment hit the internet, everything changed. The moment the interview ended, Ethan barely managed to keep his professional smile intact as the cameras cut. But Stallone? He simply stood, stretched his shoulders, and gave the audience a small wave before walking off the set like nothing had happened. Backstage, producers scrambled. Ethan's earpiece buzzed with frantic voices. "That did not go as planned. Social media is already picking it up. Cut the controversial parts before we post it online." But it was too late. Someone in the live audience had already uploaded clips. Within minutes, the internet was on fire. "Stallone body slams TV host. Sylvester Stallone destroys woke media in live debate. This is why we still need real men like Stallone." The video spread like wildfire, jumping from Twitter to Facebook to YouTube. People clipped the best moments, overlaying reaction memes, slow-motion replays, and even dramatic background music. Within hours, the clip was trending #1, and the comments, a battleground. "I don't even like Stallone's movies, but this was incredible. He said what everyone's been thinking but too scared to say." Notice how the host had nothing when Stallone turned the tables. Classic. Of course, the backlash wasn't far behind. Just another aging celebrity stuck in the past. Toxic masculinity at its finest. Can we stop pretending this guy is some intellectual? Ethan's network scrambled for damage control. They released a carefully worded statement about how differing opinions spark meaningful conversations. Ethan himself went on Twitter, posting, "Healthy debate is important. I respect Mr. Stallone's views, even if I don't agree. Let's keep the conversation civil." But no one cared. The internet had already decided who won. Meanwhile, Stallone? He didn't post a single thing. No tweets, no press statements. He simply went about his day, unbothered. Because unlike the people arguing in the comment sections, he had nothing to prove. But as the dust settled, a much bigger question started floating around. Was this just a viral moment? Or had Stallone exposed something deeper about modern media? Days passed, but the clip refused to die down. It was everywhere, on morning shows, podcasts, even news segments dissecting what it all meant. Some called it a wake-up call. Others labeled it a manufactured controversy. But one thing was clear. People weren't just talking about Stallone. They were talking about something bigger. On one side, people were saying Stallone had exposed the hypocrisy of modern media, how hosts like Ethan loved to push an agenda but folded the second they were challenged. They expect celebrities to just nod along, but the moment someone thinks for themselves, they freak out. On the other side, critics argued that Stallone was just another rich actor clinging to outdated ideas. It's easy to preach toughness when you're living in a mansion. But then, something interesting happened. Firefighters, police officers, military vets, factory workers, construction crews, single moms, people who actually knew what toughness looked like in the real world started speaking up. A viral Facebook post from a retired Marine went everywhere. Stallone gets it. Strength isn't about being a bully. It's about standing up when life knocks you down. We need more of that. A mother from Oklahoma shared a video. I raised 3 boys on my own. If I hadn't been tough, they wouldn't have eaten. Don't tell me strength is a bad thing. Even a quiet clip of an older man at a gas station went viral. He was watching the interview on his phone, shaking his head. These kids don't know what real struggle is. They think life's about debating nonsense on TV. Stallone, he understands real life. Ethan, meanwhile, went silent. The network kept pushing other stories to shift attention, but it didn't work. Every attempt to move on was met with one question over and over again. Why did a Hollywood actor have more common sense than a professional journalist? And that's when the real conversation began. Not about Stallone, not about the interview, but about the bigger picture. Had modern society really gone soft? Were people so afraid of real strength that they wanted to pretend it wasn't necessary? Was the media actually shaping culture? Or just controlling it? These weren't just viral talking points anymore. They were dinner table conversations. People weren't just watching. They were waking up. And Stallone? He still hadn't said a word. A week later, Stallone finally spoke. Not through a press release, not on social media. It was during a casual interview in a small gym in San Diego, California. A local reporter asked him about the viral moment, expecting some kind of damage control. Instead, Stallone wiped the sweat from his forehead, took a sip from his water bottle, and shrugged. Look, man, I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was just being honest. The reporter pressed. But did you expect the reaction to be this huge? Stallone chuckled. I've been around a long time. People always act surprised when someone tells the truth. That's the world we live in now. The simplicity of his response hit harder than any speech. No grand statement, no victory lap. Just a man who said what he believed and moved on. But the real impact? That was still unfolding. Ethan Caldwell's show saw a ratings drop. His network quietly pushed him into different segments, away from high-profile interviews. He wasn't canceled, but he wasn't the same rising star either. Meanwhile, something unexpected started happening. People began rewatching Stallone's old interviews, his speeches, even his movies, seeing them in a new light. Clips of Rocky Balboa's famous monologue resurfaced. It ain't about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. People started using it in discussions about grit, resilience, and real strength. And outside the online debates, in the real world, something shifted. Young men started showing up at boxing gyms, pushing themselves harder. Parents talked about teaching their kids discipline instead of entitlement. Workers found themselves standing a little taller, pushing through struggles instead of complaining about them. Not because Stallone told them to, but because they saw the difference between real strength and performative weakness. In the end, this wasn't about one interview. It wasn't about Stallone versus Ethan Caldwell. It was about a world that had forgotten what toughness actually meant, and one man who reminded them. If you made it this far, ask yourself, what kind of strength do you value? Is it the kind that folds the moment it's questioned, or the kind that stands firm when it matters most? Because at the end of the day, toughness isn't about muscles. It's about who you are when no one's watching. Like what you heard? Subscribe for more stories that make you think. Because in a world full of noise, the truth still matters.